That time I got reincarnated as a true dragon by NautyManu. Chapter 80. Run. Just as Lucia conjured the barrier, the outer barrier that Veldora made broke under the combined attacks of the enemy soldiers. Under the threat of Emperor Rudra's arrival, their coordination improved significantly. Just as they were about to cheer in joy, they all suddenly felt a familiar pressure. But this time it was stronger. It was Veldora using his conqueror's pressure. But unlike the last time where he was in a great condition, this time he was very weakened, so theorized his pressure should be less intense. But that would not be a problem if Veldora took advantage of a single detail: his soul. Since his soul as a true dragon is more robust and stronger than any being, his soul pressure if put to the maximum output is the strongest. So last Veldora was holding back due to his weak body. But this time he let his pressure fully out of his body. Although this is doing continuous damage to him, he didn't care. If he could hold it for a few minutes, he wouldn't mind dying. Raven, who was also affected by Veldora's pressure, lost his composure. Like his men, he was also forced to kneel on the ground. Since this pressure is directly harming his soul, his unique skill couldn't help him at all. But despite this, his mind tried to come up with different solutions. From his observation, he could see cracks forming on Veldora's body like it was a broken vase. So he could conclude that this skill is not something permanent. And since they had some experience with this skill earlier, he knew they just needed to make Veldora move or stop his concentration. But that is easier said than done. Raven looked at his remaining men and saw that they were on the verge of losing their minds. Clicking his tongue, he tried to use his skill to bring them under his influence. Thank goodness his plan was a success, as they had no way of resisting. But despite that, it also brought him a big disadvantage. He could feel the pressure he was feeling increase as he took control over his men. This was to be expected, as Raven's unique skill is essentially using his astral body, which in turn makes his defense even more thinner. Gritting his teeth, he tried to ignore the pain, but to avail. Soul damages are not something that could be healed without the necessary skills. And in the cardinal world, few people even have the knowledge to utilize those skills. And sadly, Raven isn't one of them. And just as he was about to try something else, he suddenly had a sudden chill running down his spine. He didn't know why, but his instincts as a master strategist and his basic instinct as a human is screaming for him to flee this place immediately. And from the look of it, he isn't the only one feeling it, as some of his men who were previously on the verge of falling unconscious suddenly regained their senses and are doing their best to go away from this place. But too bad for them, they're too late. The sky, which was clear, suddenly began to be covered by dark clouds. The sunny weather suddenly took a 180 turn as it began to rain heavily. Lightning began to crackle as if the heavens were screaming in terror on what's to come next. While all these ominous omens happening all around him, Veldora didn't panic. In fact, he had a relieved smile on his face. "Finally, you sure took your sweet time, little sis," he said as he looked at the sky. And from the direction he was looking, a huge dragon with dark blue and purple scales began to appear from the dark clouds. It scanned the whole area with its golden eyes. When its gaze locked onto Veldora and his family, the gaze softened a bit. The dragon glowed and black smoke began to cover its whole body. The smoke traveled near where Veldora was kneeling and transformed into a silvery blue-haired woman. Rimuru looked at his elder brother's condition and realized that his life is not in danger for now. She then looked behind her and found Lucia and Milam inside a small barrier. Although Milam seemed to be unharmed, Lucia is covered in her blood. And from the looks of it, she is barely hanging to her conscience. Seal, heal both Lucia and Big Brother. Make sure their lives are not in danger. And also look for any injuries on Milam. Rimuru instructed, as she needed to make sure both Lucia and Veldora were not in danger. Then she turned her attention to the enemy soldiers who were frozen in fear. With her hair covering her eyes, she issued another request. "Oh, and lastly, can you make a small illusion around us to block the view I'm going to let loose for once?" Seal came out of Rimuru's body and nodded her head. She then erected a small illusion barrier surrounding Veldora and his family so they would not witness what would happen next. Especially Milam. She is too young to witness what it means to face the wrath of the Queen of the Underworld. After the barrier was made, Seal went and began her duties. She knew that her master would only calm down after both Lucia and Veldora are out of harm's way. So the quicker she stabilizes these two, the less likely her master would go on a rampage. Seeing her group's vision being enhanced, Rimuru began to walk towards the soldiers. Although her steps are slow and calm to Raven and his men, it is like death is coming near them. With every step she took her pressure began to increase. The barrier that was restricting the usage of magicules was broken as soon as she stepped on the ground. A new one was erected by Seal to ensure the whole cardinal world wouldn't be destroyed by her master's overwhelming aura. But even that is barely holding out as there are numerous cracks appearing everywhere. You know I'm normally a calm person, even if you point your blade at me I wouldn't kill you just because of that. But, Rimuru said while taking the sword that Veldora used into her hands from the ground. With a casual swing that made the space tremble she asserted, when you go after my loved ones, that's when you cross the line. Her sword began to be covered in a dark energy. And unlike the stellar mana, this energy is the opposite. It destroys and devours everything in its path. Known as the most destructive energy of the cardinal world, turn null energy. So it's time for you to pay for the consequences, Rimuru said in a cold, emotionless tone. Rune. It isn't sure who said that, but every soldier including Raven obeyed the order as if their lives depended on it. Oh wait, their lives did depend on it. Whenever one of them fell by stumbling or had to push another to advance further, no one bothered to say anything about it. In fact, no one even registered such situations happening. They had only one thought in their minds: run. Chapter 81. The terror brought by a true dragon. But despite their efforts, how could they run away from a true dragon, especially from one who is after blood? Rimuru just casually looked at fallen soldiers and swung her sword at them. To an untrained eye it would appear as though Rimuru was just casually swinging the sword. But if Rudra and Guy were to see this, they would realize that Rimuru had swung her sword a dozen times in that second single. The nearby fallen soldiers all screamed as their bodies were suddenly cut into many pieces. And if someone observed them carefully, you would realize that none of them were hit in their vitals. They were dismembered in a way they would feel more than usual. This is Rimuru's punishment for them. She wanted them to suffer as they slowly died after losing blood. They will feel the same amount of pain Lucia and Veldora suffered due to their actions. Rimuru, ignoring the screaming soldiers, continued her walk. Those guys are the lucky ones, as they would just get the tip of the iceberg. Her real punishment is just about to begin. As the remaining people were running in fear, Rimuru swung her sword again and struck a few more soldiers. But this time, instead of people being dismantled into pieces, she cut the legs of everyone in her eyesight. The men didn't realize until they fell to the ground that their legs had been chopped off. The cut was so precise that some of them didn't even hurt for a minute. But in the next second, dark flames came out of their wounds and soon engulfed the whole body. They screamed as they were burned to death. And unlike normal flames, this flame is quite special. Not only will it burn the physical body, it will also completely burn the astral body and the soul itself. The remaining group, which included Raven, was more disenchanted as they heard those screams. They used every fiber of their strength to run as fast as possible. They didn't want to become the next victims of that demoness. But too bad for them, Rimuru isn't going to let them go. Rimuru looked at a few men and said, "Freeze." A part of the group at her command froze like statues. No matter what they tried to do, they couldn't move a single muscle of their bodies. "Turn around." At Rimuru's command they turned around. And oh boy, did they wish they didn't. The look Rimuru had was so scary that some of them even peed themselves in fear. This disgusted Rimuru, so she stopped what she was going to do to them. She was going to dismantle them into pieces and switch their body parts and create a unique being that would help her hunt down the rest. But that is out of the question, as she doesn't want to even be in their presence. So she instead did this. She created a few knives and threw those at him. She then ordered, "Take these knives and kill each other." The last one should repeatedly stab himself to death after killing everyone. Although this may be quite lackluster compared to her previous punishments, it actually isn't. These knives have the property of using thought acceleration when touched. So as soon as these knives even scratched, you would feel the pain of the knife cutting your flesh very slowly for a long time. This method is something Rimuru did to Clayman at the Demon Lord's gathering. And even a demon lord like Clayman almost lost his mind due to the pain he suffered from that method, and that was just a few punches. So imagine what kind of pain they would have after being stabbed by knives. The men took the knives and started to fight each other like crazy, and every time they got a wound they would scream in agony. But despite their pain, they couldn't stop their bodies from moving. After seeing them fight each other, Rimuru left them alone and put her attention on the remaining people who were doing their best to escape. After her previous actions, the number of men who were running was reduced to 3. Rimuru pointed her hand towards them and said, "Dark binding." From the shadows black bindings came out and tried to bind them, but the 3 of them were elite amongst elites. So they were able to escape their fate from being binded very quickly due to their skills. But they had no chance to rejoice as the nightmare they were avoiding the most had already caught up with them. But contrary to what they thought, Rimuru just walked past them. She didn't even glance up at them. But the men couldn't breathe a sigh of relief as they were suddenly transformed into a bloody mist. When Rimuru walked past them, she cut them down to such small pieces that they were blown away by the wind like a pile of dust. "You are the last one," Rimuru muttered as she looked at the woods. Her eyes were still glowing with rage. Raven ran through the woods like a madman. Earlier, when Rimuru was about to command the soldiers to stop, Raven had a terrible feeling. So he used his life-saving treasure immediately. It was a teleportation marble that allows the user to teleport into a distance of 500 meters after crushing it. And thanks to this treasure he was able to escape from Rimuru's command magic. But Raven didn't dare to celebrate his victory. Who knew when that monster would find him? So as soon as he was able to catch a bit of his breath, he ran again. The more distance he was able to get from that place increases the more chances of his survivability. While running, he couldn't help but remember the scene where that dragon turned into a woman. As far as he knew, while monsters could turn into a humanoid form, they still have some characteristics of their species. There has been no record of any monster who was able to achieve a complete human form. And even if one were to achieve such a feat, they must be a higher life form. Wait, if it is a higher life and that too is a dragon. Could it be one of them? Raven thought as he remembered something terrible. When he was able to visit the Imperial Library, he once found an ancient book about monsters. In that book there were records of numerous monsters who once roamed the Cardinal World. And in that book there was mentioned of a species of dragons. They are the true dragons, who are said to be the highest life form of this world. It is said that true dragons are natural disasters who cannot be stopped. In that book there was said to be 5 true dragons. One, the Star Dragon King, who is also the creator of this world, which is said to be the oldest among true dragons. Then there was the Void Empress, who is also known as the Chose Creator, as she was one to create monsters in the Cardinal World. The third of them is the White Dragon, who lives in the Northern Continent. And fourth and not least, the Scorched Dragon, who is also referred to as the Guardian of the Eastern Continent. And finally the Storm Dragon, who is also said to be the youngest of the true dragons. But the book didn't mention anything other than his title, as he was never seen after his birth. So many people are skeptical about his presence. Could it be him? That dragon did bring a storm with its presence. Raven thought with a shudder. What Raven at that time didn't know was he was about to get answers to his question very soon, and too in a more terrifying way.